I'm sure this won't come as a surprise to any of you, but I get really nervous before doing these videos. You know, being on camera is way out of my comfort zone, and I genuinely care about getting this right. You know, there's a lot to remember, a lot of scientific terms, the right order of ideas, and the last thing I want to do is waste your time. So before every single episode, I always go for a walk. There's a big hill at the back of my house, and I walk up and back fast enough that it feels kind of hard, but not so hard that I'm struggling to breathe. And it usually only takes around 30 to 45 minutes. And as I walk up, I go through what I want to say in my head. And sometimes, if there's no one around, out loud. But by the time I get back, I feel completely different. I'm calmer, the information feels more organized, and I'm good to go. The video you're watching right now, I did exactly that this morning, about half an hour ago. But what I was doing on that hill isn't exercise for fitness, it's exercise as a tool. You know, something that you can use deliberately before you need to do something that matters to you, you know, to improve how your brain performs. And that's what this episode is all about. For most people, exercise is something that they do for their body, you know, something long term, something that pays off eventually, whether that's better health or longer life, look better with clothes on, look better without clothes. That's all great, that's all true, but it's not what I want to talk about today. What I want to talk about is using exercise strategically. You know, before a presentation, an interview, an exam, a creative challenge, or a difficult conversation, or just a difficult day. Not weeks from now, not in a couple of days, I mean now, today, you know, maybe in a few hours. Because when you understand that exercise, specifically moderate exercise, what it actually does to your brain in the short term, you stop thinking of it as something that competes with your work. You start thinking of it as a secret weapon, you know, something that you can use to prepare for work. So why does this work? Well, I'm going to keep the science brief and light here because it's the foundation, but it's not the whole point I want to make. When you do moderate exercise, a few really important things happen. Your nervous system shifts. It moves away from the sympathetic state, you know, the alert, reactive, slightly stressed state that most of us operate in by default. And it moves towards a parasympathetic state, which is more rest, digest, thinking clearly, access information. Now, if you've ever noticed that you feel strangely calm after a long, gentle run or walk, that's exactly what's happening there. So cortisol, which is your primary stress hormone, starts to regulate. So moderate exercise doesn't spike cortisol in the way that high intensity work does. And done at the right intensity, it can actually help bring elevated cortisol back down to its kind of optimal level. Now, the research suggests that moderate cortisol levels actually supports memory and attention. The problem most busy professionals have is chronically elevated cortisol from stress. It can work against you. And also your brain gets better blood flow because, as we've discussed before, moderate aerobic exercise increases circulation, which delivers more oxygen and glucose to the brain. Over time, this supports the growth of new brain cells in the hippocampus, which is the region responsible for memory and learning. So I guess to summarize, it simply helps your brain operate in a better supplied environment than it was when you were sitting at your desk. And none of this is that complicated, you know. You're calmer, your stress hormones are better regulated, and your brain has more of what it needs to work really well. And that's the mechanism, basically. Now, let's talk about zone 2. Now, most people, I think, hear that term and picture marathon runners with GPS watches and heart rate monitors going out for 5 hours on a Sunday morning. And I think this is why a lot of people are put off by it, you know, and kind of give it a bit of a wide berth, because it's a real shame, because zone 2 is probably not what you think it is. Zone 2 is simply easy to moderate intensity exercise, usually around 60% of your maximum heart rate. Now, the simplest way to find it, you don't need watches or whatever, is the conversation test. Now, you should be able to hold a normal conversation without gasping for breath. You know, you're working, you can feel it, but you could talk to someone if there was someone there. That's it. And here's the bit that surprises most people, I think. Any exercise that gets you to that point counts. You know, it could be a brisk walk, cycling, swimming, low intensity gym workout, golf if you're walking around the course, even playing with the kids. Now, I mentioned last week about cycling through the woods with my 9-year-old son. It was fantastic. I speak about it in a newsletter, and that was my zone 2 for last week, and consequently, it was the best night's sleep I had for probably 2 weeks. Now, zone 2 isn't a specific activity, it's an intensity level, you know, and once you understand that, the barrier starts to disappear pretty much entirely, right? Now, let me show you what this looks like when it's used deliberately, not as a fitness tool, but as a performance tool. So yesterday morning, I worked with a client who has a live interview on CNN. Now, she was really nervous, you know, understandably. Live television is a different kind of pressure, and she needs to be calm, articulate, and be able to recall specific facts and dates and events on demand in front of a camera and with no second takes. Now, the original plan was to go for a run around the local park and maybe do some bodyweight exercises. You know, I was thinking fresh air, natural light, the kind of session I'd normally love for a morning like that. But the pollen count in London was off the chart yesterday, and the last thing that she needed was to turn up at the studio, you know, with streaming eyes and a blocked nose and full of hay fever. So we adapted. We stayed inside instead. Now, I know I'm always saying how important getting outside is, but for this person on this day with this interview coming up, avoiding hay fever was more important. So we started on the treadmill, just slow, and I just listened to her, you know, not to solve problems, not to coach, just to listen. Let her talk, let her get things off of her chest. Having a little chat also allowed me to subtly monitor how hard she was working, you know, and I could reduce or speed up the treadmill if I thought that she wasn't working hard enough. Now, then we moved on to some light boxing, and I love boxing, but I want to be clear about why I chose that. I wasn't just trying to keep her moving, I was adding complexity, like combinations that made her think, not just kind of jab, jab, right. The sequences I was calling required her to actually process information under mild physical stress, which the research shows improves attention and memory encoding. Then we finished with some light mobility and some light weights with a specific focus on posture. Now, I've noticed that over the years, working on posture before a high stakes moment changes how people carry themselves when they walk into a room. Confidence is partly physiological, you know, how you stand affects how you feel. Now, I checked in with her this morning and it all went really well. She said she felt calm and clear and was able to recall everything that she needed. Now, she's pretty sure the session made all the difference, and I'm more than happy to take the credit on that one. And I've used variations of this with lots of different people, including actors, you know, preparing for their roles. That zone 2, it settles the nervous system, helps them to remember their lines, and improves breathing for long periods of dialogue. Same basic structure, moderate movement, conversation, complexity woven in, nothing that spikes the heart rate too high, you know, nothing too out of the ordinary with all of this stuff. And I've done it with executives, you know, before board presentations or investor meetings, you know, difficult negotiations. The profile is basically the same, you know, highly capable, slightly overactivated, carrying too much cortisol into a room that needs precision and calm, not stress and anxiety. One story I remembered when I was preparing for this, and it kind of made me smile. I remember I once asked a very senior, pretty serious CEO to play hopscotch. He looked at me like I'd completely lost the plot. But what I needed was for him to think, balance, coordinate, and maintain a zone 2 heart rate simultaneously, because there's solid research showing that exercise requiring coordination and balance under mild physical demand improves memory, attention, executive function. It stimulates the vestibular and proprioceptive systems in a way that regular kind of aerobic just doesn't. And he actually messaged me when he left the meeting to tell me that it worked and the meeting went really well. And he does it all the time now, actually. And it's really handy when he's traveling because he doesn't need a gym. It's just a nice little kind of preparation tool before he has to do something pretty serious. But it's not just high stakes moments either. I mean, I use zone 2 personally whenever I feel a bit mentally stuck, you know, when I'm overwhelmed with information and can't figure out what to do with it. You know, when I've been staring at the same thing so long that none of it makes any sense anymore. Now, every single one of my best ideas has without doubt come during or after a zone 2 session, not from sitting at a desk trying to focus harder, but from moving at a pace where my brain can actually breathe. Now, if you write, create, plan, or problem solve as part of your work, and I'd guess that a lot of you watching this probably do, The walk before the work isn't procrastination. It might be the single most important and useful thing that you do all morning. The practical part. Now, the biggest barrier for most people isn't motivation, it's time. And the honest answer is that zone 2 doesn't need to be a separate event in your day that you need to create time for. Walking the dog at a decent pace, that's zone 2. Cycling to work, zone 2. A long walk at the weekend that also happens to involve fresh air and nature and whoever you're walking with, that's zone 2, and you're also ticking about 4 other health boxes at the same time. Even within a training session, you know, a longer warm up and cool down, that's zone 2, you know, working it around your strength training without adding much more time. In fact, you'll probably save time. And if you do weights training in supersets or a mini circuit with short rest periods, you can combine strength training with zone 2 in the same session, and that actually reduces time and gets you out of the gym even quicker. 2 or 3 sessions a week at that sort of intensity should be enough to make a meaningful difference, you know, in your baseline stress levels, your sleep quality, your cognitive endurance throughout the whole day. Now, it doesn't need to be long. It doesn't need to be tracked obsessively. It just needs to be kind of consistent enough that your nervous system learns to find that state reliably, gets used to it. And if you want to use it as a pre-performance tool, perhaps the morning before something really important, something really meaningful to you, 20 to 30 minutes is enough. You know, you don't have to feel exhausted. You don't want to feel exhausted afterwards. You need to feel calm, clear, and ready. Now, I walked up that hill this morning because after 2 decades of doing this work, I know my brain performs better when I've moved first. Not dramatically different every single day, but consistently enough that's become a non-negotiable for me. The thing is, you probably already have a version of this in your own life. It might be a walk that clears your head, a bike ride that helps you think more clearly, or a workout that leaves you feeling sharper than when you walked into the gym. Now, you might not have been calling it zone 2, you might not have connected it to cognitive performance at all, you might not have made that kind of connection, but you felt it, right? You felt better. And what I hope this episode has done is to give you a way to use that feeling on purpose. You know, not just when it happens to happen, but before the days that you need to be at your best. Now, that's not just fitness, that's performance. If you found this useful, the newsletter is where I go into this kind of thing every week. Practical, evidence-based, it's free, and the link is below. And the Fit Mind community on School is where all the kind of coaching conversations happen. That's also free, and I'll also link it below. Have a great day.